Hey everyone, and welcome to Season 2 of Tech Talks with Tomer. I'm your host, Tomer, VP of Product at the Stellar Development Foundation. And on this show, I get to talk with some of the top technical leaders in blockchain about the biggest innovations happening in the space. Today, I have with me Sergey Gorbunov, CEO and co-founder of Axelar. So if you've been following Stellar, you know that we're pretty big on interoperability. And Axelar is too. It's a decentralized protocol that facilitates cross-chain interoperability. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the show, Sergey. Hey, Sergey, how's it going?
Hey, it's going good. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. And in terms of definitions, did I get Axelar right?
I think that was succinct and good to the point, so that's good.
So maybe we can start off by if you can tell us a bit about your background and how you ended up in blockchain and how Axelar came to be.
Yeah. I mean, my background, distributed systems and cryptography, worked a little bit on software-defined networking, then did PhD at MIT doing kind of protocol design. So I worked a lot on like lattice-based cryptography, new types of like advanced cryptographic primitives. Then, at the end of grad school, started to play with the blockchain space a little bit. So I helped to design and kind of launch the Algorand protocol with, the team out of MIT and the faculty there. I, in parallel, spent a little bit of time as a faculty myself at the University of Waterloo, and then kind of took a leave to focus on a couple different, ventures, including the Algorand protocol. And so after the launch of the Algorand protocol, it was clear that, we're not going to live in the world of one chain, right? I think, a lot of other technology stacks were being built in parallel. Some of them optimized for specific use cases. Other ones had very unique kind of technical approaches, right? And so for the ecosystem to continue to be able to innovate and scale, I think connectivity across those layers and those blockchains and stacks is fundamental to solve, right? And there's nothing really that you can use out of the box. And I thought this would be an important problem to focus on, and that's how we started Axelar. It's been a kind of a little over 2 years since we started the project, but it's been an amazing problem to work on, both from a technology side, but also because we have an opportunity to collaborate and work with a lot of different ecosystems, which I find, incredibly rewarding. So kind of excited to continue building this future.
Awesome. So, effectively what you're building is a proof of stake blockchain that also happens to connect to a lot of other blockchains. And, we all know that every blockchain is a bit of a unique snowflake from a technical perspective. So, what does it mean for you? What are the technical challenges that you experience in connecting with all these different technologies in a succinct way?
Yeah. So if you look at our kind of our early posts and like design objectives, I think one of them was pretty critical to be able to kind of plug and play in existing blockchain stacks, right? So kind of the alternative you can think about, well, why don't we make every chain kind of implement a certain protocol that will be compatible with all the other chains, right? And I think so IBC kind of went down that path with the Cosmos ecosystem, where the Cosmos consensus, and the IBC protocol, they're aware of each other. They know how each other functions, and that's what enables kind of interoperability there. But I don't think that's a good requirement for innovation, where you want to allow different blockchains to mature and scale and develop on their own, right? So the plug and play connectivity was a critical requirement that we had. And so how do you enable this plug and play connectivity, right? And I think in the networking concept, it's a pretty well known kind of a principles that you have to obey. One principle is is called like a gateway based connectivity, which is kind of what we mirrored some of our designs, right? So the idea is that on every blockchain that we connect, there is a notion of a kind of gateway / router, right? So think of it as you have a router at home, right, that connects your home network with the outside world, and you can send messages back and forth to it, and then the underlying kind of a protocol forwards those messages to external ecosystems. And so in the same way for Axelar, there's a notion of this gateway that gets deployed. It's a smart contract, but that can be deployed on any blockchain. And then the Axelar protocol and the validators would be able to understand information going out of those gateways and know how to send information back into those gateways, and then facilitate the rest of the message passing, translation of messages if there needs to be finalization, security, and so on and so forth, right? So that's kind of how we approach it. And then some of the challenges is kind of thinking about, well, what does this gateway actually look like so it can scale across multiple chains, very efficiently. For EVM, you can mostly reuse the same code. For other chains, maybe you have to write some kind of a one-off gateway implementations, and then you always think about like what is the minimal amount of work that you need to do to make sure it still remains secure and robust, right? And so that's the approach that we've taken, and I think so far it's been scaling really really well. Like we connected over 37 networks through the stack, and kind of the list keeps on increasing pretty gradually.
Interesting. So what you're saying is that in a perfect world, all blockchains would just like implement their, a unified messaging protocol and just like holistically and, beautifully connect to one another. But in practice, we live in reality, and every blockchain is a bit different. Not all of them were like written from the ground up to facilitate cross-chain communication. So you're taking a more kind of like practical approach to connect these networks.
That's correct. Yeah, and I think it's not just practical. I think that's the only approach that can scale, frankly, right? Because technologies continue changing, right? Like the transport layer, the underlying execution layers, they will always get better and better over the years, right? Like we've seen that in the history of computing technology. You have, you know, kind of a 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, right? Like the protocols need to continue innovating. To enable that, you can't enforce requirements on the connectivity layers, right? It has to be a little bit more external. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk a bit about our favorite topic here, which is Stellar. So for anyone who doesn't know, last year we announced a bridge bounty for building cross-chain interoperability solutions for Stellar. And Axelar is one of the participants and winners of that bounty program, and you are in the process of integrating with Stellar's smart contract platform, which is Sorbonne. And I'm sure you're very excited about this, but from your perspective, what is the value prop of integrating with Stellar?
Yeah. So to me, I think Stellar has a very unique both technical stack and also distribution, right, and use cases. I think it's probably not a secret that there's a lot of kind of a payments focus that Stellar, has been going after. I think, I know at least a handful of very, very strong stable coins that have been issued on the Stellar platform. And the question is, if you have these interesting applications and use cases like stable coins being issued on Stellar, you still want to make sure they're composed with the rest of the ecosystem, right? So that liquidity can go in and out, that the applications on other chains, whether or not it's Ethereum or Avalanche or Solana, can interact with these stable coins, be able to send them back and forth, be able to tap into all of that liquidity, and kind of regulatory frameworks. And so to me, that's really the power, right? Is that taking a blockchain that has a very unique kind of a go-to-market and technical stack and use cases, connecting it with the rest of the ecosystems where maybe other use cases or other types of primitives exist, and then composing that all together in one. So that's why I'm excited. I think kind of in parallel, we actually announced sort of integration with things like a Filecoin, right? And I think that's another example where you have a chain that's sort of specific around a certain use case like storage, right? And now imagine like all of these different ecosystems can talk to one another. One is like payment issues, right? And stablecoin issues platform with like storage, with like DeFi, with NFT platforms, and they all can interoperate in a seamless way. And to me, seamless really means that the users can interact with these chains and applications with one click, right? Like I think that's the goal, being able to simplify user onboarding processes across the whole ecosystem. That's the only way we can continue growing.
I completely agree. Yeah, that's great. And speaking of, we spoke a lot about smart contracts, and much like us, you're actually in the process of adding a virtual machine to your blockchain. So can you tell us a bit about this virtual machine and what you're trying to get there?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we learned over the last few years building kind of Axelar is that we can't keep up, right? Like I think, like frankly, the demand for more connections is larger than we can take on. Developers are continuing to seek better developer experiences, managing their contracts across multiple chains, deploying them, in this interconnected world. So for us, the virtual machine there is to be able to scale interchain faster, right? That's really the end of the end of goal. So could you simplify the process of making a connection to Axelar and all of its ecosystems, right? How can you make it permissionless and self-serving for developers, right? And so the idea with the virtual machine, you'll be able to do those things where you can instantiate like a set of template contracts to say, this is my chain, this is my layer. I want to connect it with, hundreds of other ecosystems with one connection. I need to follow this process and instantiate like some certain contracts, and then I'll have access to this like universal router on Axelar that will be able to route my information to everything else. I can customize security in parallel, right? And I can say, well, maybe my protocol, it relies on like external validation. Maybe it has like zero knowledge proof, so like clients that I can tap in. So you'll be able to customize all of those processes. So that's number one, is being able to scale connections across ecosystems faster by enabling developers to kind of self-serve and onboard themselves, right? The second actually product that we launched on the virtual machine, which I'm pretty excited about, is called the Interchain Maestro. And the idea is that how can we make it simpler for developers to manage their contracts across dozens of chains, right? So today, I think if you talk to a developer that's building across multiple environments, they'll tell you that they spend kind of a 70 or 80% of their time actually managing these deployments, not actually building the application layer code, right? So how can we reverse that and say, 80% of the time you should be able to focus on your application code and 20% of the time on the deployment and managing processes, right? And so the idea of this sort of amplifier was that, well, we can actually now instantiate a set of template contracts sort of on Axelar that will have one hop reach to every network that would allow you to manage it with one click, right? So you can say, this is my bytecode. I want to deploy a piece of it, on Stellar, because this is maybe where my kind of a new coin is being issued, but I want to make sure it can be sent to 5 other chains, right? And I should be able to do all of that with one click and like simple SDKs and management processes around it. So that's the idea of a service that I think is sort of an interoperability layer service that can now live on Axelar, that gives you like the fastest and the shortest path way to manage your contracts and upgrade them across multiple environments. So that's the end of the day, right? Like the virtual machine is there to simplify developers' lives in the interchain world.
Awesome. That's great. And I am curious if it sounds like the virtual machine hasn't always been on the roadmap. And I'm wondering if you had like this aha moment along the way in which you realized, this is the final straw. We can't keep up with the innovation unless we're opening this up with a virtual machine.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, I think it was always like on the back of our minds, right? Like when and how we want to do this. I think like the technology wasn't quite there yet. From the networking layer on Axelar itself, I think we needed to build like a certain gadgets. We're also kind of the virtual machine that we're using is sort of powered by Cosmos technology, which like a couple of years ago I think was still in the early phases of development. But I think as we're building, it was more and more obvious that at the networking layer, to actually provide strong security and composability, you have to have more and more sort of isolation between building blocks, and you have to have more programmability, right? And so you can add that isolation and programmability, the consensus layer, and it's actually pretty hard to enforce, right? Like that's frankly the reason, like it adds, a lot of messy dependencies in code that's just hard to manage in practice. And so, the virtual machine is a way to simplify all of those things and say, okay, you can instantiate your connections, you can make them faster, and we can isolate resources and isolate security from one connection to another, in a very, very, very effective way. So yeah, I think to your point, it was always on the back of our minds, maybe not as clear, but I think it became more and more clear over the years that, certain properties that it provides are just stronger. Actually, on that, I'm actually quite curious. What led you guys, right, to think about the virtual machine, and like what was some of the, was it also like a gradual process or an aha moment?
I think there was definitely an aha moment in 2021. So basically Stellar never had smart contracts, and the idea was that everything you need to build, cross-border payment solutions is baked into the core protocol. And in 2021, we added AMMs, kind of like Uniswap v2 style AMMs. And the idea was to make it easier for like retail market makers to get into the picture. And that was quite the lengthy process to add that feature. And I think between starting that feature and wrapping it up, so much new innovation happened in the space, and we were like, wow, like if we actually want to take things like Uniswap v3 style things and stable swap, it's gonna be such a lengthy process, and it's just not a scalable way to introduce innovation. So I think that was like releasing AMMs was pretty much the aha moment for us, that we really need like for the time it takes to build like two AMMs, we can actually build like a smart contracting platform, and that's what we've been up to.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm curious. Obviously, like we've looked at a lot of smart contract platforms. We actually talked with the COSM WASM folks, Ethan Frey, and everyone, and it's been super helpful in surveying the space. Have you had any specific dilemmas, whether like what to go with, or was COSM WASM just a default because you're a Cosmos blockchain, and COSM WASM is kind of like the go-to platform on the Cosmos space?
Yeah, I mean, yes, you're right. Sort of a kind of a, I think in the Cosmos ecosystem, there's now like two stacks you can pick from, right? Like you can pick the VM stack, and like a couple projects like Avmos, use Solidity, and then you can pick like the Cosmos stack, sorry, the Cosmosm stack. Um, I think to us though, it was clear that we needed to provide very, very strong security, right? I think you see constant kind of attacks in the blockchain space and the bridge space in particular, interoperability. So providing very, very strong security is fundamental. And I think Rust based environments provide better security properties and isolation. It sometimes has a slightly slower kind of a go to market, right? Because it is a bit harder to develop code, but once you actually do it, it actually remains pretty robust and secure, right? Like as an example, we had a multi-party cryptography library that we were originally importing, and it was written in Go, right? And we had all kinds of like issues with it, and our engineers were like, we should rewrite it in Rust, we should rewrite it in Rust. I'm like, well, it's gonna take us 6 months back, right? And like we'll have to rewrite the whole thing. But we still took the jump, and at the end of the day, like we wrote it, and like we frankly have no issues with that piece of code, right? And so in a highly secure, highly distributed environments, I think it's just a great language to work with, and I think developers love it these days as well.
That's awesome, and we couldn't agree more. We're also, building on Rust and WASM, and we think these are like great interoperable, very secure technologies for the future. So definitely agree on that.
Makes sense. And I guess like, sorry, yeah, then quick question. So you guys have like WASM machine underneath the hood, so you can like technically even like compile potential like from different, languages down to the WASM executor VM?
Yeah, and we actually have there's already an assembly script SDK for Soroban, and one of our engineers, Lee, has actually prototyped a Zig SDK. And Zig, if our viewers are not familiar with, is like this nifty new programming language that a lot of programming language geeks are falling in love with, and it's really unlike Rust, it's very minimal and was like really built for portability. So Rust originally was not really built to build like small programs, right? And that's why sometimes it's difficult to get programming sizes small. But Zig is really great with that, and we're kind of excited about the future of Zig. It's not quite there yet for mainstream adoption. But I think that's one of the beautiful things with using WebAssembly, is that basically anything that kind of like taps into the LLVM toolchain is available to you, which is great.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, no, that makes total sense for sure.
Awesome. So before we wrap up, we know that the virtual machine is the big thing you're working on right now. But can you give us a sneak preview for like what's around the corner and what's in the future for Axelar?
Yeah, so I would say like two things that we're focusing over the next year. One, scaling the platform so we can support more integrations, right? So, through the virtual machine and like different services around it, like, Stellar and so on and so forth, connecting with more ecosystems is still kind of a top of our minds and priorities. So there's a lot of, layer twos that are pretty exciting now. We announced, integration with the base chain. So we're kind of alive on the test net. So yeah, continue to scale the network. The second piece, which I'm super excited about to continue thinking through, is that how do we actually build these kind of chain agnostic applications that span the whole of Web3, right? And I think that requires a little bit more than just the interoperability kind of a protocol. It actually requires different application layer, what I call like interoperability protocols, plus the right services to be done. But the result is that you can have applications that, first of all, they scale, right, horizontally across the Web3, but two, they have very strong security properties, right, and very strong UX properties. So from a security properties, if you compose applications by doing, kind of smart contract calls and things like that, you actually will take very minimal risk on the underlying bridging technology, right? So I think like Squid is one example, that application that went live on Axelar that like composes existing dexes without creating any extra like liquidity or shuffling like wrapped assets back and forth. So I think it's like very, very interesting sort of design. And very, very interesting UX where you can interact with, dozens of chains with one click without having to think about it. So that's what we're, spending, we'll continue spending a lot of our time is thinking, what does the developer, processes look like, so they can say, I want to launch my stable coin or something, on Stellar. This is one click. It's automatically like interconnected with other assets, across the ecosystems. You can send it back and forth, and that requires a certain layers of stack to be built in parallel, and so that's a lot of the work is around that.
And that's very cool. And I'm curious, do you imagine a world in which people actually deploy their Dapps directly on Axelar as like the primary chain now that you have this virtual machine?
I mean, I don't think the developers would want to deploy like Dapps on Axelar. They can use Axelar to manage their Dapps instantiations across multiple other chains. So, for instance, like the execution of the code, should not happen, I think, on Axelar. Maybe for some like interoperability layer protocols, but like the rest of the code, should be executed elsewhere, right? Like Axelar as a network is not designed for, being like an executor environment for DeFi or anything else. It's designed to scale interoperability, right? So, I guess when I say deployed through Axelar, it would be like, you have a raw bytecode that's not necessarily executed on Axelar, but it helps you kind of get shipped on multiple chains and instantiated there with bridging support, with kind of cross-chain support with one click, so you don't have to do anything else, in parallel.
Got it. So strong focus on interoperability, which is your kind of like core strength. Awesome. So we're at time. Sergey, if people want to keep up with you and with Axelar, where can they find you?
Yeah, so for Axelar, you can go to axel.network, our website. You can find a lot of relevant links to, Twitter, community forums. There's a Discord with the developer forum, which is pretty active. For myself, you can follow me on Twitter as well. It's Sergey_NOG.
Awesome. Sergey, it's been a pleasure having you here today, and I'm looking forward to meeting you again in person. Thank you, and have a great day.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Great chatting.